Star Trek, Primitive Passenger Season 4, Episode 4. Mercer and Co. The vast expanse of space stretched endlessly beyond the Havoc's viewports, a silent testament to the lonely journey Nolan Mercer had embarked upon centuries ago. Inside the ship's bridge, the air hummed with the quiet efficiency of advanced technology, punctuated only by the occasional beep of a console or the soft whir of a holographic display adjusting. Nolan sat in his command chair, his fingers dancing over the translucent controls before him. The stark contrast between the darkness of space and the vibrant displays cast an ethereal glow across his features, highlighting a face etched by centuries of life and adventure. "Nolan," Elara's voice broke the contemplative silence, "we're receiving an unusual transmission. Well, you should probably see this for yourself." With a lazy wave of his hand, Nolan brought up the message on the main view screen. His eyes widened as he took in the gaudy advertisement before him. Mercer's Miracle Mead, the drink that stood the test of time, just like the man himself. Nolan Mercer's seal of approval guarantees quality in every bottle. The ad featured a cartoonish caricature of Nolan, complete with an exaggerated grin and a thumbs-up pose. In the background, a stylized version of the Havoc soared past, leaving a trail of golden liquid in its wake. Nolan's jaw dropped. "What the hell is this?" Elara's holographic form materialized beside him, her expression a mixture of amusement and concern. "It seems your reputation precedes you, Nolan. This isn't the only one. There's been a surge in products and services using your name and image across the region, but I never approved any of this." Nolan sputtered, his indignation rising. "Hell, I've never even tasted mead." Elara nodded, her tone gentle. "It appears your longevity and colorful history have made you something of a legend in certain circles. People are capitalizing on your mythos." Nolan leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. "Great, just great. I'm still kicking, and they're already turning me into some kind of tall tale." He stood abruptly, pacing the bridge with restless energy. "Pull up everything you can find on these Mercer-approved products. I want to know who's behind this and how far it's spread." As Elara complied, filling the air with holographic displays of various advertisements and product listings, Nolan felt a strange mix of emotions wash over him. There was anger, certainly. The audacity of these people using his name without permission grated on him. But beneath that, a more unsettling feeling gnawed at his gut. He paused before a particularly outlandish ad for Mercer's marvelous magnetic boots. "Walk on any surface, just like the legendary trader." "Is this how people see me?" he muttered, more to himself than to Elara. "Some larger-than-life character from an old spacer's tale?" Elara's voice was soft when she replied. "You've lived longer than some species in this quadrant, Nolan. You've seen and done things that most can only dream of. It's not surprising that stories about you have taken on a life of their own." Nolan snorted, but there was little humor in it. "Yeah, well, last time I checked I was still flesh and blood. Not some damn fairy tale." He turned back to the main console, his jaw set with determination. "All right, let's start with this Miracle Mead. Find out where it's being distributed and trace it back to the source. I think it's time I had a chat with whoever's behind this little enterprise." Elara's fingers danced over the holographic interface. "I've got something. It seems the mead is just one product in a whole line of Mercer's branded items. They're all distributed by a company called Mercer's Marvelous Merchandise on Rigel the 7th. Nolan's eyebrows shot up. Rigel the 7th. That's not exactly a backwater. These guys have some nerve. Hours later, Nolan found himself standing before a garishly decorated storefront. Holographic images of his own face grinned down at him, advertising everything from Mercer's magnetic boots to Nolan's nebula neutralizer. Gritting his teeth, Nolan pushed open the door, a chime announcing his entrance. The interior was just as loud as the exterior, crammed with shelves of bizarre products, all bearing his name and likeness. Two men, clearly brothers by their similar features, looked up from the counter. The older one, sporting a badly dyed comb-over, grinned widely. "Welcome to Mercer's marvelous merchandise. How can we help you today?" Nolan strode forward, his patience already wearing thin. "You can start by explaining why you're using my name and face to sell this junk." The brothers exchanged glances, their smiles faltering slightly. "Your name?" the younger one asked, his voice tinged with skepticism. "That's right," Nolan growled. "Nolan Mercer, the real one. I don't recall giving anyone permission to slap my face on, whatever the hell this is." He picked up a garishly colored bottle labeled Mercer's Miracle Hair Tonic. The older brother let out a bark of laughter. "Oh, that's a good one. Listen, pal, we get Mercer impersonators in here all the time. You're not bad, but the real Nolan Mercer died decades ago. Everyone knows that." Nolan's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Is that so?" "Look," the younger brother interjected, his tone placating, "we appreciate the enthusiasm, but you're wasting your time. Why don't you buy a souvenir and be on your way?" Nolan slammed his hand on the counter, causing both brothers to jump. "I'm not leaving until you take down every bit of this nonsense and issue a public apology." The older brother's face darkened. "Now, listen here, you crackpot. I don't know who you think you are, but you don't come in here threatening us. Gordo, show this joker out." The younger brother, Gordo, came around the counter, cracking his knuckles. "Time to go, Mr. Go." "Mercer," he sneered. As Gordo reached for Nolan's arm, the centuries-old traitor moved with a speed that belied his appearance. In one fluid motion, he grabbed Gordo's wrist, twisted, and sent the younger man sprawling into a display of Mercer's marvelous magnetic boots. The older brother let out a roar of anger and vaulted over the counter, swinging a wild haymaker at Nolan's head. Nolan ducked under the punch, feeling the whoosh of air as it passed over him. He countered with a quick jab to the brother's solar plexus, doubling him over. Gordo, having extricated himself from the tangle of magnetic boots, charged at Nolan from behind. Without looking, Nolan sidestepped, causing Gordo to crash into his still-winded brother. The two went down in a heap, knocking over a shelf of Nolan's nebula neutralizer in the process. Nolan stood over the groaning brothers, barely out of breath. "Now," he said, his voice deadly calm, "are you ready to listen, or do you need another demonstration?" The brothers looked up at him, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and dawning realization. The older one swallowed hard. Who are you really?" Nolan's lips curled into a grim smile. "I told you, I'm Nolan Mercer, and we need to have a serious talk about your business practices." As the brothers struggled to their feet, surrounded by the wreckage of their faux Mercer merchandise, Nolan couldn't help but feel a grim satisfaction. It wasn't often he got to set the record straight so emphatically. The brothers, bruised and chastened, slumped against the counter. The older one, nursing a swollen jaw, spoke up. All right, we'll tell you everything." Nolan crossed his arms, his gaze steely. "I'm listening." "We get all our stock from a big automated factory on Rigel the 7th's third moon," Gordo mumbled, wincing as he touched a growing lump on his forehead. "Guy who runs it lives in some fancy asteroid that orbits the moon. Real piece of work, that one." The older brother nodded. "Name's Darius Vex. He's the real brains behind this whole operation. We're just distributors." Nolan's eyes narrowed. "Darius Vex," he repeated, committing the name to memory. "And this asteroid home of his? It's like his own private little moon," Gordo added. "Orbits the actual moon. He thinks he's untouchable up there." A slow, dangerous smile spread across Nolan's face. "We'll see about that. You two," he pointed at the brothers, "are going to shut this place down and issue a public apology." The brothers nodded vigorously, clearly eager to avoid another demonstration of Nolan's abilities. Without another word, Nolan grabbed a pair of Mercer's marvelous magnetic boots and strode out of the ransacked store. As soon as he was clear, he tapped his comm badge. "Ilara, I need a blink to these coordinates." In a flash, the Havoc materialized in orbit above Rigel the 7th's third moon. The asteroid in question was clearly visible, an ostentatious structure jutting out from its rocky surface. Nolan's fingers flew over the controls, targeting systems locking onto the massive factory complex sprawled across the moon's surface. "Sir," Alara's voice carried a note of concern. "Are you sure about this?" Nolan smiled. "Absolutely. Sometimes you need to send a message that can't be ignored." With a series of rapid-fire commands, energy beams lanced out from the Havoc, striking the factory with surgical precision. In moments, the complex was reduced to a smoldering crater, a clear statement to anyone who thought they could profit from Nolan Mercer's name with impunity. As alarms undoubtedly blared in Darius Vex's asteroid home, Kablooey. Nolan grinned. "Let's see him explain this to his investors," he muttered. Without waiting for any response from the moon or the asteroid, Nolan engaged the blink drive once more. The Havoc vanished, leaving behind a very clear message etched into the moon's surface. As they reappeared in a distant sector, Nolan leaned back in his chair, a mix of satisfaction and weariness washing over him. It wasn't often he had to resort to such dramatic measures, but sometimes the direct approach was the only way to cut through the myths and legends that had grown around his name. "Well," he said to Alara, "I think that takes care of the worst of it. Let's see if anyone else feels like using the Mercer name without permission after this." 6. "Got something on the Mead guy, if you're still interested," Ilara announced. "The Mead seems to be originating from a small trading outpost in the Barados system. It's being distributed by a company called Nolan Mercer's Cargo & Co." Nolan's eyebrows shot up. "You've got to be kidding me." Ilara shook her head, a wry smile playing at her lips. "I'm afraid not. And it gets better. The company's owner and CEO. His name is actually Nolan Mercer." For a moment, Nolan was speechless. Then a slow, dangerous grin spread across his face. "Well now, isn't that interesting? Looks like I need to have a little face-to-face with my namesake." He strode toward the hold, a new energy in his step. "Set a course for the Barados system, Alara. It's time this imposter learned what happens when you trade on Nolan Mercer's name." As the Havoc's engines hummed to life, Nolan felt a familiar thrill of anticipation coursing through him. This wasn't just about protecting his name anymore. This was a mystery, a challenge, and if there was one thing Nolan Mercer loved, it was a good challenge, and punching pirates. The stars outside the view screen blurred and snapped into position as the ship blinked, carrying Nolan toward a confrontation with his own legend. Whatever awaited him in the Barados system, one thing was certain. It was going to be one hell of a story. A brilliant flash illuminated the night sky over the northern continent of Barados, momentarily turning darkness into day. There was only one explanation for such a phenomenon, and it set a chill down young Nolan Mercer's spine. "Oh, Croden's slop," he blurted out, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and terror. "What have I told you about that language, Nolan Mercer?" A shrill voice cut through his panic. His mother, a formidable woman with steel-gray hair and a perpetual scowl, glared at him from across the room. Letting free a long, exasperated breath, he replied with zero emotion, "Yeah, Mom." But his mind was already racing, calculating the implications of that flash. The Havoc had arrived. The real Nolan Mercer was here. Young Nolan ran a hand through his disheveled hair, his heart pounding. He'd known this day might come, but he'd hoped, well, he wasn't sure what he'd hoped, that the original Mercer would never notice, that he'd be amused by the homage, that he'd died centuries ago and was just a myth. He paced the cluttered office of Nolan Mercer's Cargo & Co., his eyes darting between the outdated computer console and the window overlooking the bustling spaceport. The same spaceport where, any minute now, the legendary trader might appear. "Mom," he called out, trying to keep the tremor from his voice, "I think we might have a situation." His mother emerged from the back room, wiping her hands on a greasy apron. "What now?" Another complaint about that watered-down swill you call mead. Young Nolan shook his head. Worse, I think. I think the real Nolan Mercer is here. For a moment, his mother's perpetual scowl deepened. Then, to his surprise, she let out a bark of laughter. Well, it's about damn time. I was beginning to think all those stories about him were just tall tales. Mom. Young Nolan's voice cracked with disbelief. This isn't funny. He could shut us down, or worse. She waved a dismissive hand. Oh, please. If half the stories about that man are true, he's got better things to do than worry about a sad little outpost like yours. But young Nolan wasn't convinced. He'd built this business on the Mercer name, trading on the legends and myths that had sprung up around the centuries-old trader. It had seemed harmless at first. After all, who could it hurt to name a few products after a man who was probably long dead? But now, faced with the reality of the situation, young Nolan felt a cold sweat drip down his back. He'd never meant any harm, really. Hell, in a way, he'd thought of it as a kind of tribute. But would the real Nolan Mercer see it that way? As if in answer to his unspoken question, the comm system crackled to life. A gruff, authoritative voice filled the small office. This is Nolan Mercer of the Havoc. I'm looking for the owner of Nolan Mercer's Cargo & Co. We need to have a chat. Young Nolan's eyes met his mother's, panic written across his features. For once, she didn't look amused or annoyed. She looked worried. Nope. Her apron hit the floor, and she was out the back door in a flash. Thanks, Mom. Young Nolan swallowed hard, his hand hovering over the comm switch. This was it, the moment of truth. With a deep breath, he pressed the button. This is Nolan Mercer, he said, wincing at how small his voice sounded. I'm the owner of Nolan Mercer's Cargo & Co. Come on up. He pushed the button and buzzed Nolan in. Nolan strode into the cluttered office, his imposing presence filling the small space. His eyes quickly took in the young man before him, noting the nervous sweat on his brow and the slight tremor in his hands. So, Nolan said, his voice gruff but not unkind, you're the other Nolan Mercer. The younger Nolan nodded, swallowing hard. Yes, sir. I can explain. He motioned toward the back. My mom, you just missed her. Nolan held up a hand, silencing him. He moved around the office, picking up various Mercer-approved products, examining them with a raised eyebrow. Yeah, the old girl skedaddled pretty quick. Nolan laughed. You've been busy, he remarked, turning a bottle of the infamous mead in his hands. Tell me, kid, what possessed you to use my name for all this? Young Nolan took a deep breath, steadying himself. Honestly, sir, it started as a joke. My mom named me after you. She was a big fan of the stories. When I started this business, using your name seemed like a good way to get attention. I never thought that I was real or that I'd show up. Nolan finished for him, a wry smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Both, I guess, the younger man admitted. Fair enough, Nolan nodded, considering. He could see the potential in this kid, the entrepreneurial spirit, the clever marketing, even if it was misguided. It reminded him a bit of himself, centuries ago. All right, here's what we're going to do, Nolan said finally. You're going to stop using my name and image without permission. But, he added, seeing the young man's face fall, I'm not here to shut you down. In fact, I think you might have some potential. Young Nolan's eyes widened in surprise. Sir, I've got operations across several sectors, Nolan explained. Could always use someone with your creative approach to business. How'd you like to look into some legit Nolan Mercer seal of approval products? And maybe learn a thing or two along the way. The younger Nolans looked up. Are you serious? You're not just going to blow me out an airlock, are you? Nolan laughed. Kid, I can kill you right here. I don't need to take you all the way to space first. Do you want the best job in the galaxy or not? See if Mom can get what she paid for. Yeah, of course. I can go right now. Young Nolan, his face stoic and hiding any fear, though there was plenty. Good. Pack your bags, kid. You're going to spend some time with one of my top managers. Learn the ropes, see how a real interstellar trading operation works." As the young man rushed to gather his things, babbling thanks and promises, Nolan allowed himself a small smile. He'd come here ready for a confrontation, but instead, Nolan watched the young man scurry about, a mixture of amusement and resignation settling in his gut. He'd come here ready for a fight, maybe even looking forward to putting this upstart in his place. Instead, he found himself with a new Level 3 cargo handler he'd never asked for. Still, there was a certain irony to it all. Here he was, the living legend, about to show this kid just how unglamorous the reality of his life could be. Maybe having someone around who saw the day-to-day grind would help keep the more outlandish stories in check. After all, it's harder to believe in the myth when you're watching the man curse over broken replicators and haggle over dilithium prices. Nolan sighed. At the very least, it might be entertaining to see where the kid's ideas would take him. The Havoc's bridge hummed with its usual quiet efficiency, the soft glow of holographic displays casting a gentle light across Nolan's face. He sat in his command chair, brow furrowed as he pored over the latest inventory reports. Something wasn't adding up. "Ilara," he called out, his voice a mix of confusion and mild irritation. "I thought we were having trouble getting rid of that yamak sauce. Isn't it too thick or something? Mind telling me why we're running out of it in 3 of our 4 facilities?" He swiveled in his chair to face her, eyebrow raised. "They're putting in emergency orders." Ilara, a hint of amusement playing at the corners of her mouth. "It's not just the extra thick yamuk sauce, Nolan. Check the self-sealing stem bolts." Nolan's fingers danced across the translucent control panel, bringing up the relevant data. His eyes widened in disbelief. "I just marked 4 million of them for recycle. All of a sudden, there's only 1,000,002 in stock." Ilara's mirth was like a light coming on. "That's Nolan Mercer in action right there," she exclaimed, wagging her index finger playfully. Nolan's face went blank, his expression the perfect picture of bewilderment. His mouth opened and closed a few times, no words emerging as his brain struggled to process this information. Seeing his confusion, Ilara leaned in, her eyes twinkling with barely contained glee. "Nolan Mercer, your little buddy from the Cargo & Co.," she explained, her voice bubbling with amusement. "He's been liquidating all kinds of junk. Yeah, I'll say it, it's junk. And he's turning it into cash." Nolan's eyebrows shot up, a mixture of surprise and grudging admiration crossing his face. "No kidding?" he marveled, leaning forward in his chair. "He's getting a reasonable price out of this stuff? Or just dumping it below cost?" "So far, everything's been profitable," Ilara replied, her tone impressed despite herself. "He's been upselling them on shipping and packaging, too." Images began appearing on the view screen, a parade of creative marketing that left Nolan shaking his head in amazement. "Oh, that's rich," Nolan murmured, his eyes drinking in the audacious advertisements. "Mercer's self-sealers, tight as the Havoc's hull," he read aloud, a reluctant chuckle escaping him. "Nolan's private reserve, Mercer's bog yamuk for the discerning Cardassian. Purgium tailings of Mercer, help soil retain water, results guaranteed." Each slogan was more outrageous than the last, a testament to young Nolan's marketing prowess and utter lack of shame. The older Mercer found himself torn between exasperation and a grudging respect for the kid's hustle. With a resigned sigh, Nolan asked the question he knew he'd regret. "What are we paying him?" "Standard assistant cargo handler 3rd pay grade," Ilara replied promptly. "He takes his in latinum, never credits." Nolan nodded slowly, his mind working through the implications. After a moment of contemplation, he made his decision. "Put him on a station sales rep base pay and 20% of his profits. You can backdate that too." He paused, a mischievous glint entering his eye. "We can't have him pushing a cart full of latinum around, though. Set him up with an account on the station and shared quarters, lower decks." Ilara's hologram quirked an eyebrow, her tone gently chiding. "That's just mean, Nolan. Shared quarters." "Really?" Nolan leaned back in his chair, a wry smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "We're paying him a pile of money because he figured one thing out. That's to encourage him and see if he's scared of money. But we can't make it too easy on him." As Alara set about implementing the changes, Nolan turned back to the view screen, still displaying young Nolan's creative advertisements. Despite himself, he felt a spark of something he hadn't experienced in a long time, watching a natural-born salesman develop, mixed with the challenge of keeping up with the quick-witted upstart. The vastness of space stretched out before the havoc. But for once, Nolan Mercer's thoughts weren't on the next big score, or the looming threats on the horizon. Instead, he found himself oddly excited to see what his young namesake would come up with next. The galaxy, it seemed, still had some surprises left for the old trader after all. As the Havoc's calm system crackled to life, young Mercer's eager voice filling the ridge. "I have a chance to pick up 2 old UFP K7 space stations, Nolan. They're free, but we have to move them. I'm sending over specs now. I don't think even the Havoc is big enough to hold them, but I thought I'd throw it over to more experienced minds than mine." Nolan leaned back in his chair, eyebrows raised in surprise. "That's an interesting opportunity, Nolan." The name felt strange on his tongue, like an ill-fitting glove. He shook off the discomfort and continued, "Where are you now?" "I'll send a ship." "I have a ship," came the quick reply. "I can come to you." Nolan's brow furrowed. "How'd you get a ship?" "Never mind. Blink it over here." "Quick as a brick, sir." Mercer out. As the comm went silent, Nolan turned to Alara, his face a mask of confusion. "Quick as a brick? What the fuck is that about?" Alara sat at the nav station, a bemused expression on her face. "The Maldor cruiser, Nolan. Quick as a brick. People have been using it on and off for about 8 years. Not sure where it got started." Nolan shook his head, filing away this piece of linguistic evolution for later consideration. "What do you think of the K7s?" "He's right," Alara replied, her tone thoughtful. "Too big to fit inside, even if we cut it up first." Nolan's fingers drummed against the armrest of his chair. "Any way to blink the whole thing." "Let me work on it," Alara began, but her words were cut short as she registered a new presence. "He's here, Nolan Mercer." Before Nolan could fully process her words, a shimmer of light coalesced on the bridge. Young Mercer materialized before them, looking for all the world like he'd done it 100 times before. His confident stance and easy smile belied the monumental nature of his feat. Blinking directly onto the Havoc's bridge was no small accomplishment. Nolan found himself momentarily speechless, caught between admiration for the kid's audacity and concern over the security implications. Young Mercer, oblivious to the older man's internal struggle, strode forward with the eagerness of a puppy. "So," he said, his eyes bright with excitement, "about those K7 stations. I was thinking, if we can't move them whole, maybe we could strip them for parts. There's got to be some valuable tech in those old birds." Nolan blinked, forcing himself to focus on the matter at hand rather than the jarring presence of his young doppelganger on the bridge. "Hold on, kid. Let's back up a step. How exactly did you manage to blink onto my ship?" Young Mercer's grin widened. "Oh, that. Just a little trick I picked up. Figured if I was going to live up to the Mercer name, I'd better learn to make an entrance." Nolan couldn't help but let out a short, surprised laugh. The audacity, the quick thinking. It was like looking into a mirror of his younger self. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to marvel at the strange turns his life had taken, leading him to this surreal moment of mentoring a younger version of himself. "All right, hotshot," Nolan said, gesturing to the holographic display of the K7 stations. "Let's hear your ideas. But after this, you and I are going to have a long talk about ship security and the proper use of transporter technology." As young Mercer launched into his enthusiastic pitch, Nolan exchanged a glance with Alara, her face alight with what could only be described as amused resignation. The kid had just finished his pitch, his words tumbling out in a rush of enthusiasm about salvaging parts and materials from the K7 stations. Old Nolan listened, his face impassive, before dropping a bombshell that sent the younger man reeling. "We're going to get at least one of these stations operational, preferably both," Nolan declared, his voice carrying the weight of centuries of experience. "And you're going to run them." Young Nolan's jaw dropped, his eyes widening to saucer-like proportions. "Run them for what?" he sputtered, his earlier confidence evaporating like mist in a Vulcan desert. A wolfish grin spread across old Nolan's face, his eyes glinting with a mix of mischief and challenge. "Whatever you can make money at and not die." "What?" The word escaped young Nolan's lips in a high-pitched squeak. Old Nolan leaned back in his chair, ticking off possibilities on his fingers. "If you can use it as a cargo hub, buying and selling, that works. If you add entertainment, gambling, drinking, other vices, that works too." The color drained from young Nolan's face, his earlier bravado replaced by sheer panic. "Are you crazy? I don't know anything about any of that stuff. No kids, no slaves, and don't get killed," old Nolan added casually, as if discussing the weather. "Keep that last part in mind." Young Nolan stared in disbelief, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, no words emerging. The tense moment was broken by Ilara's calm voice. "Sorry, Nolan," she said, her tone matter-of-fact. "I don't see any way to move these stations." Old Nolan's face fell, disappointment etching deep lines around his eyes. Young Nolan's expression, however, flickered briefly with relief before he schooled his features into a mask of disappointment. "Oh, man, that's too bad," he said, his voice a touch too eager. "What an opportunity." Ilara let the tension build for a few agonizing seconds before her lips quirked into a sly smile. Just kidding. I think we can blink them as one unit, using multiple ships. If it doesn't work, we go back to a salvage operation like you suggested, because they'll be torn apart." "But hey, nothing ventured, nothing gained," old Nolan chimed in, slapping his younger namesake on the back hard enough to make him stumble. "This is going to be good, kid. You're going to get rich, and better yet, you're going to make me more rich, and that's the really important thing." Young Nolan's face was a study in confusion, his eyes darting between old Nolan and Ilara, as if watching a particularly intense game of velocity. He never knew whether to laugh, agree, or disagree. Old Mercer was as hard to read as ancient Iconian script, his weird colloquialisms and deadpan delivery making it impossible to tell when he was serious. The kid swallowed hard, feeling like he was standing on the edge of a precipice. On one side lay the comfort of his small-time operation. On the other, the terrifying unknown of running entire space stations. The weight of old Nolan's expectations pressed down on him like the gravity of a neutron star. As the implications of what he'd just agreed to began to sink in, young Nolan felt a curious mix of terror and exhilaration. He was about to embark on the adventure of a lifetime, guided by the most infamous traitor in the quadrant. Whether that was a blessing or a curse remained to be seen. "Nolan, you're not really going to dump that poor kid into the middle of running a station on his own, are you?" Ilara asked just seconds after the bewildered and overwhelmed young Nolan had transported off the bridge. "Nah," chuckled Nolan. "I have a couple Ferengis dying for a project like that. They can show him the ropes, where the money comes from. Tossing him to the Ferengi, they'll eat him for lunch." She responded dryly, "They work for me. They do what they're told. Besides, they always know they'll make out working with me." He stared at Ilara, and the words mechanically came from his mouth. "They know what side their bread's buttered on, Nolan?" He continued to stare at her, completely lost. "Nolan," Ilara yelled. Nolan rubbed the back of his neck. "I need to sleep." He stood bolt upright and headed toward his quarters. "But what about the K-7s? Don't you want to?" "I have every faith." His door swooshed shut. Eek. Epilogue. Ilara sat in the command chair, her posture relaxed yet attentive. She gazed upward. "Hey, Nolan, what's the story with these Tellarite freighters?" "They're running behind schedule again. A muffled response seemed to come from all around. "Their Tellarite? It's their mud festival thingy for like a month. They won't be up to full speed for another week." "Uh-huh," Elara nodded, her eyes fixed on a point above her. "And I suppose you want me to smooth things over with them? You know how prickly they can be." "Nah, it's their mating season." Nolan's voice boomed from above. "They're extra prickly and extra musky smelling. Best to leave them alone." As they spoke, Elara's gaze fell on an empty package lying on the floor near the chair. Leaning over, she scooped it up, turning it in her hands. The garish lettering proclaimed, "Mercer's marvelous magnetic boots walk on any surface, just like the legendary trader." Elara's eyebrows shot up. "Nolan," she called, still looking upward, "please tell me you're not actually using these things." A hint of amusement crept into her voice. "You do remember what happened the last time you tried some knockoff, Mer?" Her words were cut short by a resounding and painful thud against the deck plating. "Ugh!" The air forced from his body. Nolan Mercer, the legendary trader himself, lay sprawled on the deck, limbs akimbo, a pair of ridiculously oversized boots attached to his feet. Elara stood, looking down at him with a mixture of concern and barely suppressed laughter. "Well," she said dryly, "I guess that answers the question of whether they work on ceilings." Nolan groaned, pushing himself up on his elbows. "Note to self," he muttered. "Walk on any surface doesn't mean stick to any surface." "You know," Elara mused, helping him to his feet, "for a man who's lived centuries, you'd think you'd have learned not to test gravity quite so enthusiastically." Nolan shot her a wry grin as he worked to detach the boots. "Where's the fun in that? Besides," he added, a mischievous glint in his eye, "I had to make sure they weren't selling faulty merchandise under my name." Elara shook her head, a fond smile playing on her lips. "Next time, maybe start with the walls." "I did. How do you think I got up there?" Nolan began to limp away. Clunk, clunk. His boots locked onto the deck, freezing him in place. He unlatched the boots and stepped out in them. "Do we have any ice?" he continued toward his quarters. Elara couldn't help but chuckle. Centuries might pass, empires might rise and fall, but some things never changed. And Nolan Mercer's penchant for finding trouble, even in the safety of his own ship, was certainly one of them.